Just a quick response to your video, Gary, on consciousness and the hard problem. Yeah, I think there's some good things there. I mean, it seems to me that what your primary aim in that video is to, just kind of lay out your interpretation of the origins of consciousness and the function of consciousness. What Jeff Cosmo in that other video that I responded to called the why of consciousness, which for him was theological. And as I sort of kind of hinted at in that video, I would say, I think I'm probably agreeing with you here, that it's more likely to have an evolutionary origin. It's about survival. Who knows? I mean, we might both be wrong, but either way, it's I think that's quite likely that we probably evolved this thing that we call consciousness now in, through the vicissitudes and the contingencies of evolutionary history. And I would also say, as I think I've said before in a couple of other videos, that I think a lot of the discussion around consciousness is hubristic. It's a bit overstated. Although having said that, I think there's a qualifier on that. It's overstated, I think, when it starts to be used in a kind of mystical way, or when it starts being used as a kind of substitute for a god or some kind of absolute value or absolute state of being. Having said that, I do think it's very important for other reasons, particularly for the reasons that I think you've been kind of getting at in some of your videos recently, which is to do with the relationship between the kind of self-aware part of consciousness and morality, trying to devise moralities in changing and complex situations, particularly. Okay. Yeah, there's just one particular part actually I wanted to visit in your video. I don't disagree with any of it, unfortunately. It's much more interesting when we disagree. But there's one bit of it I found particularly interesting, which was to do with, you got this image of a worm, which I'm kind of seeing on a pavement. I don't know why. So the sun's come out and there's a worm on the pavement next to the grass, and it's kind of wriggling around because it's on a hot surface. And a worm hasn't really got a brain to speak of. It certainly hasn't got anything like self-awareness. It hasn't got any other paraphernalia that you would need for for anything like pain response, really. I don't think. At least that's in. Yeah, actually, I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. But it certainly doesn't have enough of a central nervous system to have anything that we would be able to name as the conscious experience of pain. But the philosophical question attached to that is, does pain exist? Now, that the worm has no self-consciousness, it has no consciousness, which I think Matt in one of his videos recently rightly pointed out means knowing with. It assumes that when you're conscious, that there's the thing that's the contents of that consciousness, and then there's the kind of experiencer of it. So there's always a kind of experiencer within consciousness. And presumably a worm hasn't got that. But it does have the experience. That means something is happening there. And sure, there's physical and biochemical and and all those kind of things happening in the body of the worm as it slowly cooks on the pavement. But is this thing that you've been calling suffering happening? Is there suffering happening in the world? Even though the worm hasn't got a consciousness of suffering, almost by definition. But is there suffering happening in that entity? Or conversely, when a flower turns towards the sun or something, I don't know, it's probably a crappy example. Is there something approximating pleasure in the world at that moment? I don't know really. I guess I find it slightly easier to believe there is than this idea of this kind of free-floating consciousness. A lot of the mystical stuff around consciousness, and some of the stuff that comes from some branches of science. I mean, this guy David Chalmers, who has been cited quite a bit in relation to the heart problem, came up with the idea of the heart problem. I mean, he seems to be of the opinion that that consciousness is a kind of primitive in the world. It's just out there. It precedes humans. It precedes brains. It's just a fact of matter. Things are extended in space. Things endure over time, and things have this kind of known quality inside them. That seems to be his kind of take on it. And sometimes that known quality gets built into such a complex shape, like in a human brain, that we can identify it, but most of the time it's just out there, you know, just kind of filling space. I don't buy it, but that's kind of his idea, and I don't buy it because it just sounds quasi-mystical to me. But I kind of find it easier to believe that that some element of consciousness, something like suffering, not that it's kind of free floating, but that can exist in a way detached from other elements of consciousness. Because again, I think we tend to think of consciousness as a single undivided stuff, you know, because that's what it feels like, isn't it? It doesn't feel like we've got lots of different things going on there. But I kind of know intellectually that it's not like that. I kind of know there's lots of all different things going on and mechanisms producing it. You know, like all the wheels and cogs and pistons in my car engine produce that sound. A single sound comes out of this complex machinery. I'm kind of imagining it like that. And given that, then yeah, there should be pretty decomposable elements to that consciousness, and perhaps this worm wriggling on the pavement has got, you know, not this fully fledged engine noise of consciousness, but just that little bit of pain, just that little suffering. Nothing else, just kind of suffering away there. It isn't a very pleasant thought, you know, obviously it's quite dark. Yeah, but if it exists, it exists.